We've got Flip on the phone, yes? You said hello earlier, so I know he's there. And we've got Dave Deaver with us, which is great. Nice seeing you, Dave. Dave's in there. I thought we just would jump to our guest so that she can get out and have a reasonable evening with her family. And if you all don't know her, this is Nikki Spiller, and she's the director of Harbor Watch. We've been doing a lot with Harbor Watch for years, and maybe not for some years actually. So
Yes.
there's been some gap with the pandemic and all. But let's see. I first encountered you all, I think, water testing in the Unified Water Study. You were doing Holly Pond and 5 Mile River, I think.
Actually, just the Norwalk, the inner Norwalk.
Well, I think you actually, at the time, this was like 5 or 6 years ago. I think
We've never done any testing in Holly Pond itself. We've
Okay.
just done the outfalls for Stanford.
Maybe that's how we get mixed up.
Yeah.
Okay. And then through that association, we ultimately hired Harbor Watch to do a study in Good Wives. Flip was particularly instrumental in this, and that identified contaminants on 2 sources. One was perhaps natural, I don't know if we ever figured that out, but the other was definitely a bad septic or pipe.
Yep.
That Ed Gentile and David Knopf were quite instrumental in making sure it was cleaned up. So had some real results with Harbor Watch, and I think if we're to go forward on any actions of water quality implementation projects, we readily look to them for their advice and perhaps some official engagement. So I thought it would be great to have Nikki down. And you've been the head of Harbor Watch now for how many years?
A year and a half-ish, but I've been with Harbor Watch since 2009, so going on 14 years.
It was previously Sarah Crosby, and Sarah and yourself joined us maybe 4 or 5 years ago to present similar to this. So I thought we'd sort of repeat what was done in the past. I'm going to pass around while Nikki starts to introduce herself and what Harbor Watch does and what she's done for us in the past. I'm going to pass around something that you've maybe already seen before. It's an electronic copy I had sent around that Flip forwarded to me maybe 4 or 5 months ago, but Harbor Watch's river report for Fairfield County, and I have paper clipped a couple pages which hit our rivers, and this then as an incidental, Save the Sound came up with Long Island Sound Beach Report, and I paper clipped the rating areas and put little arrows for a couple of our beaches which are tagged. So obviously the topic here is water quality, and there's some good information in here. I want this back, by the way. You all have the electronic copy. So Nikki,
Yeah, so did you say we can project?
yeah, I'm afraid because the wall is dark, I think we have to get dark to make it be seen. So if you don't mind for a while, speaking in the dark, and I think any other way. I turned it off. Everything I did, I turned it off. Just take a second. I swear.
Okay, so so I'm Nikki Spiller. I'm the director of Harbor Watch. Harbor Watch is a water quality monitoring group, and we've been studying water quality since 1986. So we were founded by Dick Harris, who is, it was a retirement project for him. He didn't really do well in retirement. He's not a golfer, and so he started talking with the state to try and figure out where he could fill some data gaps that the state had, and they had suggested he started doing some profile surveys in Norwalk Harbor to simulate the same studies that were happening out in Long Island Sound proper. And he loved doing that, and he said, okay, where else can I do this? And he added a couple more harbors, and they said, oh, well, we could also use some fish data, so he started doing that, and then got interested in bacteria, and his retirement project snowballed into a second career for him. And in 1983, we were incorporated into Earthplace. For those of you that don't know, Earthplace is a nature discovery and environmental learning center based in Westport. In addition to the Harbor Watch program, we have an early childhood education department, so there's 100 kids on the property every day from about 4 months old through high school in the summertime when we have summer camps. We have 62 acres of preserved land. We have an animal hall and birds of prey exhibit, and all those animals serve as animal ambassadors. and just lots of nature programming for students and adults.
Is that a good focus for everybody?
So the program continued to grow, especially when we got incorporated into Earthplace, and we used committed volunteers to collect a wide variety of data, but all related to water quality and improving our ecosystem health. We also worked towards credibility over time too, because the program was growing. We wanted to make sure that the data we were collecting could be useful and that people and resource managers could trust it. So all of our projects are, especially ones that are funded by federal government, are done so under EPA-approved quality assurance project plans, which bolsters the data. And we have an in-house laboratory, which is pictured here with a bunch of our students, that is state certified by the Department of Public Health for indicator bacteria. So it's just a couple of layers of credibility that we have to the data that we're collecting.
So when we started the Unified Water Study, all the chlorophyll samples from were sent to Harbor Watch. They did all the testing in the study.
Yeah, so in my little corner of the lab, I did all that tedious work. We then continued to grow and add projects, and so we had to shift from all volunteers to a hybrid of professional scientists and citizen scientists to conduct all of our data collection. And today we are a full-time staff of 4 scientists, and in the summertime we hire 5 college interns to get all of the work done. And our mission is to improve water quality and ecosystem health in Connecticut. So that's a big basic overview of what we do and how we got to where we are. Today we're working on a variety of projects. So we have dissolved oxygen profile surveys in 7 different harbors. We conduct a fish study in Norwalk Harbor. We do a lot of in-stream bacteria testing and stormwater pollution track-down surveys. We are a participant in the Unified Water Study. We conduct salt marsh research projects with local institutions like the Maritime Aquarium, Sacred Heart University, and Northeastern as well. We partner with UConn and Connecticut Deep on a sediment and macrophyte study in Norwalk and Saugatuck Harbor. We have a number of different education initiatives for college and high school students. And our most recent thing that we have ventured into is a pathogen monitoring network, which is bringing together groups that monitor water quality in both Connecticut and Long Island to collaboratively work together under the same quality assurance project plans to collect actionable data that the state of Connecticut or state of New York has as a priority. And so Harbor Watch is one of the leading organizations of that network, but we are also a participant in the network as well, collecting data that the state has requested. And so we're in the pilot season this year, and we hope to continue to see that grow through the years. But we're really going to focus on our in-stream bacteria testing and stormwater pollution, because I think that is how the Commission and Harbor Watch could probably best partner together to solve some water quality issues. So for our river monitoring, we choose waterways based on stakeholder interests. So what do local watershed groups want? What do any town committees, the municipalities themselves, what waterways are they looking to get data on? The waterway status on the impaired waters list, if it isn't listed as impaired, we tend to prioritize it so we can try and figure out what the problem is. The data availability, sometimes waterways aren't on the impaired waters list just because they're not assessed, there's no data there, so we try to provide the state with the data so they can make those assessments so we can determine what the next steps need to be. And then in general, funding availability, our funding can come from individual donors, federal sources, state sources, community foundations, the municipalities directly. We work through a number of different avenues to get all of our data collection done. And our goal of our in-stream monitoring is to evaluate waterway health and then identify areas where elevated bacteria concentrations are and use that data to inform where pollution trackdown projects should be initiated so we can work methodically to pinpoint where the source is and get it removed from the watershed. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Harbor Watch, I do want to stress that it is our goal to always partner with municipalities. We are not out to make the town look bad, to point fingers, to rile up the public to say, oh, look what the town's not doing. We think that in order to actually solve the problem, it's best to work directly with the town to say, hey, look, we have stumbled upon this problem, and what can we do to best use your resources and our resources to solve it? And so we definitely approach all of our monitoring with a collaborative approach.
Do you do any advocacy?
Not we're not like out in Congress and trying to change the laws or anything. But some of the data that we have, we do submit to the state, and so like it can be used for that kind of work. We're just not the ones directly doing it.
What is your involvement with Stanford? Maybe you'll get to that. 'Cause I think that is this intersection of dairy and sewage and Stanford processing.
So we have an actually great partnership with the city of Stamford. They have a stormwater department specifically that's in charge of their MS4 permit, and so the head of that department is who we work with. And every time, the report you have that's going around, I share that with him. We collect data, and whenever we see a problem, we tell him, and he's like, oh, okay, here's some maps. Just why don't you go check these outfalls? We'll do some track down here. Sometimes he has his own problem that he says, hey, we were paving a road. Somebody saw something, smelled sewage, can you come take a look, do your test, and we do testing for him, we give him the results. We actually just helped him fix the problem. We identified where a sewage source was coming from. They fixed it up, and so Thursday I'm going out to go resample to make sure that what they fixed was the only problem. And then he uses that data as part of his permit reporting for the MS4 permit to say to the state, look, here's what we did, here's Harbor Watch helped us, they found it, they have the data that says we fixed it, we're on to the next thing. So we have a great partnership with them.
Do you consider them to be a responsible steward then of sewage and such?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, tremendously.
Is that, I guess, as they are, then our sewage end is being responsibly managed as well, I guess, by inference.
Yeah, so I mean, technically I work with the stormwater department. I haven't had much contact with like the WPCA specifically, because their stormwater system is so large that they're actually separate. They have to work together, but I work only in the stormwater area. Often the problem that we're seeing in stormwater is because the sanitary line is broken or there's a cross connection with sanitary. But as far as I know, everyone's been pretty responsive for when we go to our guy and say there's a problem. He calls me up within a couple of days and says, okay, here's our plan going forward. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. Can you retest in a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, depending on how long the project is going to take to get fixed. So.
I just want to clarify, because I'm trying to listen better. It seems like you have a good partnership with the stormwater community.
Yes.
But that's separate, could be separate from the relationship with the sewerage community.
They're kind of paired. My partner directly in Stamford is not the sewage guys. It's not the WPCA, and it's no one that works for the plant. It's just the way that it's broken down in Stamford. In Norwalk, for example, my contact is at the WPCA, and he is. My contact here in Darien is Public Works, so that he's both stormwater and sewage. So it's kind of, each town is broken down differently in the way that we interact with them. So for our river monitoring, our season for collecting data is May through September, and we go out and test our waterways approximately twice per month. So we get 10 water samples per season. We collect data on dissolved oxygen, conductivity, and water temperature when we're out in the field using a meter. And we also collect a water sample, and we process that water sample for indicator bacteria at our state-certified laboratory. So this map is from our Fairfield County River Report that was released in December, and it is showing all of the sites that we monitored in 2022. So there was, I want to say it was like 127, but somewhere between 120 and 130 sites. And each site is represented by a color. Green means that the site was meeting the geometric mean criteria for indicator bacteria that the state has. And anything that's yellow, orange, or red is increasingly above that state criteria. So we have a number of greens out there, which is great, a lot of yellows, and then some orange and red. And as you can see, if you give a geography, our big municipalities have a lot more red than some of the other towns that we're in.
So what's the upper right-hand corner? Is that Bridgeport or?
Yeah, it's the Rooster River and Ash Creek, Bruce Brook, and I'm completely drawing a blank on what the middle one is that we did this summer. But Ash Creek and Bruce Brook are the worst that we have.
Are they Darien waters depicted there?
So we're going to go into that
Okay,
next.
great.
So here is Darien. This is a map of the impaired waters in Darien, according to the 2022 Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection Assessment. So the Norotan River is on the left, Goodwives River is in the middle, and the 5 Mile River and Keeler's Brook is on the right. And so anything that's red is listed as impaired, anything that's blue is not listed as impaired. And Harbor Watch has data, historic data on the Norotan River, 5 Mile River, and the Goodwives River. And the data that we collect did help feed this map. So every 2 years, the state puts out an integrated water quality report, and they use our data that we collected in addition to whatever other data they have or data that other groups provide to them to make their assessments. And so our data was included in this.
How far back have they been testing the rivers?
So the Norotan River is relatively new. I think we have, since like 2016 was when we started monitoring the Norotan River. 5 Mile River, in recent years, we had like 2017 and then 2021 and 22. But there is some more historic data on that. It was just not super consistent. We weren't doing it annually just due to funding reasons. We are currently working on doing a long-term data analysis project where we are taking the 8 coastal towns and assessing the waterways and the data that we have and trying to figure out if we can answer that age-old question, is water quality getting better? And trying to pair that with demographic data, land use changes, and precipitation data to paint a really nice picture. So we're in the process of that. We hope within the next 6 to 10 months that'll be available for presentations, but that's ongoing.
Can you speak to the, so I'm looking at Scott Cove, which is that one to the right, that the multi-formed one. So that got darn good ratings in the Unified Water Study recently.
Mhm.
So can you speak to people, tell them about the difference between what you test for versus the long-term tests of the Unified Water Study?
Yeah.
And maybe the significance of both?
Bill,
So-
before we get off track, can I just, Goodwives, how far back did the?
So we only have data from 2018. It was just a one-year project. So as far as that, what we're monitoring for is indicator bacteria. And E. coli is what's used in freshwater to test for, and Enterococci is what the state wants as an indicator in saltwater or brackish water. And that's how they want the data reported so they can make their assessments. And E. coli is used because it's relatively cheap to test for. It is relatively quick. You get a result within 24 hours of your quantities of E. coli that you have. The E. coli itself isn't necessarily harmful to humans, but its presence indicates that there are other more harmful pathogens present, viruses, and it could be really hard to test for all of these other pathogens. It could take 7 days to figure out something where if we can test it and get the results back in 24 hours, you're going to have a better understanding for what's happening and be able to respond quicker. So that's why we use E. coli. The data that we're collecting is trying to identify where sewage pollution sources are. So when we collect our data, if there is an area of elevated bacteria concentrations, we try and then pinpoint and narrow in by doing repetitive testing over the course of a couple of days or a couple of weeks to find where the drop in bacteria concentrations are. So as you're moving upstream, you want your bacteria concentrations to decrease, and at that point when they take a significant drop, your problem is kind of in this little spot, and then you can go to, okay, what houses are present? Are they on septic? Is that the problem? Are there any storm drain discharges that we can see? Oh, it should only be rainwater, but we actually have a lot more flow and it's been dry for 3 weeks. Like, why is there flow here? And we can work through opening manholes and catch basins and pinpointing more and more about where the source is coming from. And so that's what we're trying to do. The Unified Water Study is collecting data on dissolved oxygen, salinity levels, chlorophyll levels, nutrients, and while a sewage source is going to impact those levels, depending on where the sewage source is, you may still have great water quality. Scotts Cove is a larger area than the width of Goodwives River, the length of Goodwives River, and it's kind of a crappy saying, but the solution to pollution is dilution. So the more water you have, the less impact. So you may, I don't even know if there is bacteria data in Scots Cove, but you may have great DO but bad bacteria, or vice versa. You know, they're connected but not always directly correlated.
This map seems a little counterintuitive if dilution is the solution with the tip of Long Neck Point, where you got a ton of water moving through there being bad, and then you got the 5 Mile River blue between the sound and the river up above. How do you reconcile that?
I can't, for the coastline stuff, I can't really rectify that for you. The data that we collect is not out there in that coastline area, so I'm not really sure where the state is getting their data from, what testing that they've done. Is it based on beach testing in the area? Is it based on the shellfishing testing? I can't really speak to that.
Or perhaps they developed a rule which said if this is within half a mile of a bad source, we can just bureaucratically extend the line.
That could be a possibility too. So the 5 Mile Harbor, though, I can definitely. So this is our data from the 5 Mile River in 2022, and so the river comes down this way into the harbor, and up in the New Canaan area, water qualities. We definitely have a lot of yellows, but it's definitely on the better side. The failures that we have over the state criteria are minimal, indicating to me that it really is just related to wet weather events and likely a more diffuse source as opposed to a direct sewage connection. And then as we move down into Norwalk and then the border of Norwalk and Darien, we're still seeing the same. The discharge point is orange. It's hard to see on this map, but at the mouth here, it's not great. But once the river does enter the harbor, and there is more water, I think we do start to see some lower bacteria concentrations. We haven't tested the harbor in a number of years, so maybe there's just not enough data at this point in this assessment for the state to have anything to say whether it's impaired or not. That part can get kind of tricky. Also, the assessments come out every 2 years, and they have to use the 2 years prior to that. So if it comes out in 2022, they used 2020 and 2021 data. So there's a weird jump. So this is the 5 Mile, what we saw. It's not great. We're not, it'd be nicer to see some more passing criteria. Definitely not the worst in the county. We are continuing to do water quality monitoring this year, and we have been working with the town of Norwalk or the city of Norwalk on some track down projects, specifically in the Keelers Brook area, which is the tributary that comes in here between 5 Mile 1 and 5 Mile 2. Through the years, there have been some progress, but nothing of substance within the last year and a half, like last year or this year. But we continue to work with them to try and solve any issues that we have. This is data from the Norotan River. The New Canaan sites fared really well in 2022. We're seeing those greens, and this one I believe was not very high over our state criteria. And then as we move down into the border of Darien and Stamford, water quality continues to worsen the closer we get to Holly Pond. This has been very difficult for us. We are constantly working with the city of Stamford and the Darien Public Works Department to try and pinpoint and narrow in some sources, and every time we think we're hot on the trail, either the source dries up or we lose it and we have to start all over again because all of a sudden the bacteria concentrations are looking fine. It's playing mind games with us.
Distinguishing between human pollution and the 100 geese and ducks that are at the top of Holly Pond.
So that's part of the problem too, is with the testing that we do, we can't differentiate that. There is DNA testing that can be done. It's very expensive, but it's come a long way since the last time I really looked into pricing for it. The thing that continues to be difficult about it is just trying to determine how much data you actually need to be able to draw the conclusions that you want to say. Darien was part of a study years ago that the way that the results were presented was kind of conflicted. Some people at the state didn't like the way that it was being portrayed. I think at the end of the day, there just wasn't enough data to draw all of the conclusions that we wanted to draw from the data. And so technology has come a long way, and if that's an option going forward of how we want to try and solve these problems, we just need to make sure that we spend the money wisely on the right amount of data collection to be able to say it is or it isn't human.
Nikki, on the Norton River, who's funding your research on this? Is it Stanford side only?
So we get a grant from the New Canaan Community Foundation to do water quality monitoring in New Canaan. And we kind of use that to cover the whole river. It's the Noroton, the 5 Mile, and Silvermine this year, the Silvermine River. And so they give us a small chunk. It really isn't enough to cover it all. The city of Stamford, we do have a fee-for-service contract with them, so every time we do track down work, especially like in the Noroton River, we can bill against them to solve that problem. And then historically, we've gotten funding as well from the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. And so federal money to come in and kind of fill in the gaps of what wasn't being covered by the Community Foundation grant or the city of Stamford. But that funding source has actually dried up for us. They did not award our grant, and then in their new grants going forward, it says that they will not fund general monitoring explicitly. So that's where the pathogen monitoring network is coming in, and so hopefully over time, the waterways that we have historically been monitoring, if we don't have the funding to do it in a particular year, hopefully if we stop testing for a little bit, it becomes a priority again at the state level, and then they will be able to include it in the monitoring for the pathogen monitoring network. So a little backwards, and we might be without data for a couple of years, unless we can get funding from a different source.
I'll just interject here. In 2020, literally in the months prior to the pandemic breaking out, we had Stanford, New Canaan, and Darien joined up to do a watershed-based plan for the Norton River. And that's like a study for 1 year where you get this plan to identify and cure the watershed's ills, to take care of this pollution. You get implementation projects, you get sort of a strategy, and the 3 towns agree to it. And I'm not sure if the state gets involved, perhaps, but
It depends on who you get funding for, but at some point the state's going to have to approve it.
to approve it, right? Because that's when it becomes an official state of Connecticut approved plan. And there's maybe 20 of these around the state. And the great part about identifying a river which needs it and getting that in place is you start to be able to raise funding off that. You know, go to things like the Futures Fund and you say, hey, we've got this established plan, we have all these projects, we just need funding to pour in to be able to implement some of them. And that's what we had hoped to do, and then the pandemic hit and everybody pulled out of that. But Ed Gentile was extremely helpful in funding some of that upfront work. He had a little kitty that he brought to the table on that, and we worked on it for about 6 months before it all just sort of collapsed. And haven't been able to get it back together, but that would be a neat goal to do. It's a lot of work to implement it for a year, but once you get the parties set up and get an engineer involved, it starts to flow.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So the graph on the left, the black bars and the stripe bars are the mean of our geometric means of all of our sites in each of the years, and then the gray line is rainfall. And what this graph is showing, in 2016, you know, we had over 500, looks like 550 was the average geometric mean. The criteria is 126, and so that was high above. And then in 2017, we saw a drop and a slight increase. Overall, though, I don't have the official statistics, but I would say the rivers remain relatively unchanged over time. You know, the difference between a 200 and a 300 is not that big. A big difference would be something like a 200 to a 1200. Those are kind of bigger changes that we would see in some of our other waterways. So over time, I think we've remained relatively the same, and we continue to monitor. but we just haven't been able to really pinpoint any sources. But both of our town partners are very interested, so every time we do come up with something of, oh, let's try and work between Norotan 3 and Norotan 4, because we see that there's a change in bacteria as we move downstream. Both municipalities are like, okay, here's those maps again. Oh, this project happened, this project didn't happen. So they kind of guide us on where we should be doing our testing. This is the data that we have from the Goodwives River in 2018. We were doing in-stream monitoring in 2018, as well as outfall screening that was conducted in conjunction with the commission and funding that we had gotten in 2017, like a 2-year project, to do outfall screening in the Goodwives River. And so the combination of the outfall screening and this in-stream data really pinpointed to the fact that the Goodwives 2 site here, this nice red one, which was very high above what the state criteria should be, that was where our problem was definitely going to be. And we were able to do some narrowing in of sources, some narrowing in with bacteria concentrations through the catch basin system on Goodwives River Road. And so in 2019, we discovered that there was a pipe connecting a septic system to the storm sewer. And by May of 2019, that home was disconnected their septic system was disconnected, and they were reconnected to the public sanitary system. And we were sampling the catch basin, which we gave a funny name, GOO13 CV. It was the first catch basin before the outfall discharge to the Goodwives River on Goodwives River Road. And in 2017, the average bacteria concentration was 227,000. And when we did follow-up testing in May after the home was connected to the public system, our average concentration was 510, which was a 99.8% reduction in bacteria. To just prove that, while we may run into some problems in the 5 Mile River or the Norotan River and haven't really been able to pinpoint anything, our system does work. We do know what we're doing, and we have been able to get these bacteria reductions. So we were pretty proud of that, and both Public Works and Public Health played a big hand in that, and really moved that along pretty quickly from the time that we found the source, and we're able to connect it to the fact that it was a single particular homeowner. So the next steps in general, we would love to partner with Darien again to tackle more water quality pollution issues. So we have the ability to conduct monitoring or track down in really any waterway if you have a concern about something in particular. We can do bacteria monitoring in-house, but we also have a couple of contract labs that we can collect samples for you and serve as the middleman to get those samples processed for things like nutrients, for example. It's a big one that other municipalities will have us test for. So I know that there's been some concerns about Scotts Cove, so we could definitely help with that. And then, as Bill mentioned, I heard that there was a need for the Norotan River watershed-based plan. And Harbor Watch has been a part of a number of watershed-based plans. Water quality monitoring is always just one small part of it, so we couldn't do everything, but to be a voice and an advocate for water quality and bacteria monitoring, in particular pathogen track down, we could help with that. And depending on where the funding for that is coming from, oftentimes if it's a 319 grant at the state, you can include some monitoring in the proposal to help kind of provide baseline data, especially if you're trying to run a model to see how we can improve water quality. It's good to have some baseline data, and so Harbor Watch has been written into a number of watershed-based plans to do that. We're actually currently doing data collection for the Bruce Brook watershed-based plan, and I also sit on the stakeholder committee for the Hootatuck River watershed-based plan. Both of those are in the works right now.
You mentioned this partner monitoring network?
Yes.
Does that have applicability to ourselves?
So I think it could. So the pathogen monitoring network is a network that's being set up similar to the way that the Unified Water Study has taken the embayment monitoring and just kind of standardized it throughout Long Island and Connecticut. And so we're doing that for pathogen and pathogen network monitoring, or sorry, pathogen monitoring or bacteria monitoring in embayments and rivers. And Harbor Watch is one of the leading organizations. The other is IEC, the Interstate Environmental Commission. They're based out of Brooklyn now. And then Katie O'Brien Clayton at the state of Connecticut is on the panel as well. And Sarah Crosby, who was with Harbor Watch when this network was getting off the ground, is now at the Maritime Aquarium. She's still involved for the time being, just to make sure that it gets off the ground, because she was so involved in running it in the first place. And so our goal is to bring together all of the different groups that are collecting bacteria data to make sure that we're all collecting data in the same way, collecting the same amount of data, and making sure that that amount of data is useful to the state. The state needs a certain number of data points in order to be able to use it in any of their assessments. So if you're a water quality monitoring group, but you're only going out once a month, it's not enough data for the state to actually be able to take your data and do something with it. They need a minimum of, in the state of Connecticut, a minimum of 8 sampling events. And so it's our goal to be able to get funding from the EPA through the Long Island Sound Study to these groups to make sure that they have the ability to go out and collect the data the correct amount of times to make sure that the data is useful, and also help provide them with the resources to get the data, the samples that they're collecting, to an appropriate lab. Harbor Watch is fortunate enough that we have our own lab that we process our samples. Many groups do not, but Harbor Watch can then serve as a lab to take samples from other groups to process them, or help facilitate those groups. Like, we're working with a group in Stonington this year, and help them get their samples to a closer lab up in Rhode Island. And so just making sure that all of the data is being collected appropriately under a quality assurance project plan and under certified labs, so that the data is just as actionable as it can be. And we are working with the state of Connecticut and the state of New York to have them prioritize the areas in which they want data, that there either is missing data, they haven't had data for a number of years, or they know an area is bad and they want a group to go out and do the pollution track down because the state doesn't have the resources to do that, the personnel to go out and do that testing. And so I think Scotts Cove at one point had been mentioned as a possible area that more data would be helpful for them. It didn't make it to the top of the list that shook out this year, but it doesn't mean that going forward it won't make it on the list. So there is a chance that if it made it on the list, either Harbor Watch could do that data collection and just report back to the commission. If the commission had a group of people who'd be willing to go and do that sample collection, Harbor Watch could process the samples. Like, you could join the pathogen monitoring network as your own little group.
On our own initiative, rather than waiting for a state designation.
I mean, you could do that anyway, for sure.
Okay.
Harbor Watch would be happy if you said, hey, we have funding, we want you to go out and test Scotts Cove, and we want it to look like this, X amount of samples between these months. Harbor Watch can go and execute that for you and give you the data.
Today, how does the process work where water quality is tested at the beaches in Darien? And
Yeah.
how is it done for shellfish purposes, shellfish consumption?
So the beaches typically are done in-house, like in Darien, I don't know specifically who does it, but in the city of Norwalk, the health department, they have people that go out and do the testing. They collect the samples and then they give them to the state for processing. But at the shellfish level, that's all done by the Bureau of Aquaculture, and they typically do their own testing, although I think in some towns, different shellfish commissions can collect the samples and bring them up to Milford for the bacteria processing.
Have we ever closed, I'm looking toward you, sir, have we ever closed the shellfish to water runoff?
Well, they're closed very frequently. I get all these notices from the Department of Aquaculture, so I'm not sure I got one today, but typically after a decent rainfall, and their triggers for different areas, they're going to be closed for some period of time. Or most recently, a number of areas were closed for July 4th fireworks under the theory that people were going to be congregating in places and perhaps discharging sewage because you had so many people waiting for fireworks to go off. So anyway, they're closed often, and that's why that hotline exists for people.
That's the notice process? Too selfish?
Yeah, so I mean, for Darien, Norwalk, and Stamford, if you're a recreational person, you call the hotline. I have no idea what the process is for commercial people, but I'm sure there's a well-established one for them.
Yes, I think our trigger is in at 1.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period.
You know, there's a whole crazy quilt map with different triggers for different
And
places.
it often depends on how far away the beds are from the coastline. Because it kind of runs in bands typically.
But it's sort of interesting, there's different triggers for shellfish, there's different triggers for bacteria, for this E. coli,
For the beaches.
the beaches.
Mhm.
There's different triggers, not triggers, but ratings for the Unified Water Study. And so here you have the ability to get stellar marks in Scott Cove, but yet the aquaculture people can shut it down for too much rainfall. And likewise, there's perhaps too much E. coli. There's all these different ways of looking at it, and I think it's hard for residents of the town to digest that. We're not totally measuring it, and we're not synthesizing it and presenting it to the town in a digestible way.
Yeah, I'd like to ask one question that follows up on that. One thing that none of us have talked about is PFAS, and is anyone doing any testing for forever chemicals in the rivers?
So we are not, Harbor Watch is not. They are extremely expensive tests, upwards of $260 to $300 for one sample. It is unclear to me at this point how many samples you need to be able to actually understand how much PFAS you have. They are a forever chemical, but as water is moving, especially in our rivers, as opposed to if it was a lake, it'd be kind of a different story. But like, when do you want to collect the sample? Do you collect it after a rain to try and catch any runoff, or if you're near a firehouse, supposedly the firehouses don't have any more of the foam that has all the PFAS, but if you were and it rained and they just done a test, do you then have a false reading? Does it linger in that spot? It's unclear. The focus now on understanding the levels appears to be at the drinking water level as opposed to surface waters. Understandably so. I know that they're trying. The state actually, somebody that I'd worked with in the water quality volunteer monitoring realm actually got moved, and now her whole role is just focused on understanding PFAS and being kind of an advocate for the state to be able to collect more data. So there's going to be more data collection in the coming years. There has been a couple of individuals who have collected some data in the Silvermine River and the Norwalk River. They've collected, so I don't know if you heard in the news about the Wilton football fields the turf fields that they were trying to put in, and some individuals had done some testing and gave some presentations, and then it was up for the town to vote, and the town, based on the information that they were provided, shot down the fields, so they're not going to be installed, because the argument was that the turf would increase the PFAS levels, and they were very close to the drinking water wells. But it was a limited amount of data, and they were definitely concerning numbers, so it's hard to just interpret what it is. I also can't, as the director of Harbor Watch, at this point figure out where, I know there's PFAS in the water, just from what we're learning, they're there. And for me to grab a sample and say, yep, it's here, I don't know what to do with it yet. There's no criteria for surface waters. There's no indication for me yet that I can work upstream like I can with bacteria to try and narrow in on the source. The source is everything. It's turf fields, it's toilet paper, it's cooking pans, it's, there's so many different places it could be coming from, that at this point, with the amount of information that we know about it, I can't really use my resources in the best way possible to make it better and to solve the problem. So we're focused on bacteria, because with that information, we can go out and find the problem.
Yeah. Does anyone test the shellfish? The
There-
shellfish beds?
So there has been a study in Greenwich. It was done, I think it was UConn did the processing and the analysis for it, and I think some of the data collection, but I believe it was paid for by the Greenwich Shellfish Commission. So they did testing of the water column, the shellfish meats themselves, and the sediments that the shellfish were on. And at the time of that data collection, they all got non-detects. But the method for how to detect PFAS keeps getting better and better. So it's unclear whether or not, if all of the samples were to be taken again today, if the method has now, if the non-detect level has gotten lower, and so now maybe they might actually get some results. That's unclear. But at the time, there was nothing, so that was good news. It wasn't that long ago. It was a couple of 2 years or so, 3 years.
Do you know if it magnifies up the food chain? Is it like pesticides?
Magnifying, I don't know. I do know that it can stay in the body for a long time. I've been told 8 years that they can find it. There have been some studies that have been done, I was told by the state, that in fish, they took a pond that had known high levels of PFAS. It was a enclosed pond. And they took fish that they knew had no PFAS in them. And they put the fish in the pond, and the PFAS levels just kept increasing over time, because they're just constantly eating in it. They also saw that there was a discharge of PFAS in a river, so the water is moving constantly. And they were able to, over a period of time, take the fish out of the river and test them. And they found that initially, the levels of PFAS in the fish were very high, but over time, fish in that same area had, the concentrations decreased over time, indicating to the researchers that it doesn't sit in the muscle and the tissue the same way that heavy metals does, that the fish may be able to get rid of it through their gills, and it might be more in the bloodstream. So there's two different things that show that it can acutely and chronically react differently in fish. So that's something I think that's going to be happening more. And I do know that there was a Long Island Sound research grant that got put out, and UConn is one of the recipients of it, and they are studying shellfish and PFAS. So it probably kicked off at about May, and it's a 2-year-long project. So we probably won't have results for a bit, but somebody is trying to start some research on it. And Harborwatch would be happy to do testing. I can't tell you if I could go out and collect the sample and I can find the lab and we can get you the results, but I couldn't tell you what to do with the results and what that means or really how to interpret them. And so that's why we're kind of staying with the bacteria for now, but we're open to doing something with it once there's a little bit more concrete, here's the problem, here's how we solve it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Nikki? It's been a nice presentation. We've kept you longer.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. And yeah, if you guys decide that you want any water quality help, feel free to reach out to us.
You know where you are.
All right. Thank you so much.
John, do you want to, you weren't on the agenda, but we're happy to let you come up here and get done before the evening gets too late. So I know you had an update on
This
great.
John or me?
No, sorry, J-O-N.
John.
Is there a way to pronounce the difference?
That's a
for the
good looking
H?
one over here. so.
I know you had some updates on Great Island, so maybe you'd like to give us those and then enjoy the rest of your evening.
How's everybody doing? Hoping you're doing fine. So as you saw in the press, we went through a process of interviewing for the 4 commission members that would be civilians, for lack of a better word. As a refresher, the committee's comprised of 9 people, so there will be 5 elected officials, 2 members of the Board of Selectmen. I'll be one, Mike Burke is the other one. Lori's chairman of Park and Rec, Jim Palin, who's chairman of the Board of Finance, and then one RTM member who's going to be Mark Ataletta. So those 5 individuals are the elected officials that are part of the group. We went through a process of soliciting applications to join to be one of the other 4 non-government official members. We received 45 applications for this. And the great thing about Darien is you produce things like what we experienced, which was every one of these applications was high quality. These were serious individuals who brought something to the table. They were not just random people looking for a commission to join. I was blown away. So the bad news is that 41 of those 45 people did not get picked for the commission. The good news, selfishly, is we have 41 superbly qualified individuals to join other commissions or participate in government in some other way. So I just am very grateful for those folks to stick their hands up like they did.
You gotta keep knocking on their door before you lose them.
I actually have applications and know where they live, so we will definitely figure out a way to get them involved at some point, but I'm thankful for the public interest in all this. The 4 members that we have brought on board are, well, exceptionally qualified, just like all the other applicants. I won't go through all that, but I will say that we are going to try to convene the first meeting of that group as soon as possible. And we're working on an agenda to get the group started and get focused right away. Personally, I think the main priority is the next 6 to 9 months, right? So how do we actually get the place safe for public access? What do we have what do we have available for the public to do? What could they engage in? What sort of activities would be possible? And importantly, what they can't do, just as a safety matter. And part of the reason for bringing that up is that as I mentioned in some of your previous meetings, it's going to be very important for this group to be involved in and supporting the commission, particularly for the 6 to 9 month effort. So for example, safe public access is going to be pretty important. And having your perspective on the coastal waters part of Great Island is going to be critical to meeting that objective. And so we know, for example, that there are a few areas that, well, they're a little run down or there's some safety related problems, and having your input to take a look at all that as part of the commission's work, I think is absolutely critical. And you guys are well positioned to do that, just given your collective and individual backgrounds. So one of the things I've mentioned before is just getting a better linkage into and connection with this August group, with things that the Board of Selectmen has going on. Great Island is a big one. There will be other things that come up. So I will definitely try to be at all your meetings, at least briefly, to make sure that we maintain that connection, answer questions you guys may have, and kind of keep that momentum going that we had at a previous meeting. But I'm feeling really good about where we are with Great Island. The transaction closing process in May, I thought went well. We've got a few other things to iron out, but I think getting started and getting public access clarified as soon as possible is going to be job one to get us going. So I look forward to all that. But as soon as we figure out the right day where we'll maximize participation in the meeting, we'll get the first meeting scheduled as soon as possible. Questions, comments?
John, there was some discussion about getting access to it. Maybe my peers have already been on the island. I mean, other than the water side, I wouldn't know a safety issue unless it came from the water side. Is there a forum to do that?
So that's a good question, particularly you guys having a chance to go see that. I have not actually talked to town officials or any of the town staff about setting up some of those tours for people who are relevant to getting us started. I will tell you that we'll definitely do that as part of the commission's work, is to get all 9 members out there so that they can see this. Most of the elected officials have been out there a few times. I haven't been out there lately myself, but why don't we just have you guys come along? So whenever I get that set up,
we'll put in a request for that with Monica a couple of months ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so we would love to follow up on that.
That I can do, and we ought to get out, and we'll set up a few different times for you guys to go, but come out and see that, and what we'll try to do is show you some of the waterway hazards that are at least top of my mind because there's a safety issue, but get a chance for you all to see it. And the other thing I'd like you to do beforehand is that Monica laid out a general vision, which may change, but one of the things I liked about it when she presented it was it kind of broke up the island into 5 zones, if you will. Some zones were more developed, others going to be more nature preserved. Again, this is just a straw man to kind of get the discussion going about long-term what our strategy would be for the island. I'd love for you guys to just take another look at that before you come out. so that you can say, okay, yeah, this is where they were standing, these were some of the development ideas that they had, so you have that lens to look through as you're looking at this from a coastal waterways perspective. So it'd be great to get your reaction to what you see and then link it back to what we've been talking about in terms of development opportunities. But I'll as soon as we get this first meeting, I'll get some options for getting a tour of the island and involve all of you guys in that.
I've got that original presentation, I'll make sure to send it all to you. If
Okay,
you haven't seen
yeah.
the original
You know what I'm
PowerPoint,
talking
which breaks it out into zones.
Great.
So,
Yeah, you'll
It's on the town website.
is it?
John, were any of the applicants chosen because of they had some expertise in environmental or conservation related issues?
Yes, so we had, I'm sorry, I don't have their bios in front of me, but several of the folks, even some of the elected officials, are very motivated by that. The others have more development-oriented experience, and so I think actually we got a good mix of both those. There is a real desire among everybody I've talked to get the balance between development and preservation, or development and what I would call unspoiled nature, or to the extent possible, to get that balance right. Nobody wants to see the island overdeveloped, but nobody wants to see an $85 million dog park with no development. And so trying to get that balance exactly right is going to be a main charge of this commission. And so I look forward to a lot of public discussion about all that. And frankly, to get you guys' input from a coastal water perspective on that, particularly on the environmental side, I think will be actually probably the biggest component of that. So the answer is yes, we will have that balance, and yes, I think we've got the right mix of folks on the committee to ensure that we have that. Other questions?
We're past Memorial Day, we're past July 4th. Anything that's really safety issue? Anything that's unexpected outcomes?
No, these are, there's no Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns that I know of. We've got a lot of known knowns, so there are some hazardous areas where there's beach and water access. So I have a map in front of me, but there's down sort of south of the stables and then down from the main house, there's a small beach area that I know has got some pretty hazardous concrete and rebar and all of that that's both on the shore and then sort of immediately offshore, and so you're not going to want anybody in the water anywhere close to that. John and I were talking earlier today about some buoys, which I'll let him address in more detail, but would keep boats specifically away from some hazardous areas that have got some obstructions that are sort of beneath the surface of the water. And so we know a lot about what the hazards are. What we haven't done is gotten sufficiently organized to make sure they're placarded in some way, both kind of from the land, and I know from the water that requires some state involvement, so it can't be done right away. But I'll let John address all that when he talks. But so it's more about making sure that the public is aware of the hazards as opposed to hazards we haven't identified. Other questions?
It looked like you got rid of the rebar, that the town got rid of the rebar. We asked for that to be done urgently, and we were out, what was this, when we were
Doing the water quality testing
Testing, yeah.
2 weeks ago, maybe.
Is there all that? I think that might have been cleared up, but there are some separate obstructions that John knows more details about.
it still exists.
And there's a number of things, at least in my mind, I've not gotten or seen a clear report that says, in terms of permitting the public to have access, and nobody's going to get hurt with that stuff, which is the last thing we want.
Bill and I went rogue and removed the duck and geese decoys, thinking that hunting wasn't going to be an approved activity.
Outstanding. This citizen initiative, commission initiative is fantastic. Anything else? Anyway, well, I look forward, Bill, keep me apprised, just keep me on your distribution list for meetings, and I'll come here and make sure you guys get informed. But definitely this commission will meet pretty soon, certainly this month, and tours will be on the top of the list, and I'll keep all of you informed about that. We'd love to have you come there.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see, so we'll switch to a little commission business before we start. So we have some minutes this month, which is more than we've had in the prior months. So if you all had a chance to read them, I sent them by earlier. This is a hard copy that's circulated if someone might make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve, May.
How are we on a vote? Second, and how are we on a vote for approval? It's unanimous, thank you. So if we have a quorum, yes, I think we do. So those minutes are approved for June 12th. I'm taking notes diligently for tonight's meeting. We've been deficient on our minutes, and for April and May, we don't have any minutes. I think on one of those I didn't assign someone, so I know June I didn't assign someone, so mea culpa, and I did the minutes as penance. And I'll do them tonight because it's not the longest
I
meeting.
sent you the May minutes.
Did you? I was going to ask. Yeah, someone took notes and I don't recall receiving it, so I must. Okay,
It's
so
an email.
I'm going to catch up on those. And what I was going to ask someone to do, if someone can stand it, is to look over you said May minutes. So
I might have meant April. It was one or the other. I sent them to you like 3 days after we had our meeting,
okay, and
in an email.
so I dropped that. What I'd like to do, I'll polish those up and submit them the next meeting. We're trying to catch up here. And on the month that wasn't done, and I think that was my fault for not assigning, so that's either April or May, and I'll send out an email to the group. I'd love for someone to volunteer to watch that TV 79 and have a thrill of getting the core of the meeting again instilled on paper. It doesn't take the full meeting to do that. I just did that for our June meeting. It takes a lesser amount of time because you can fast forward through things. Your memory gets jogged. So it's about an hour exercise. If you throw me a rough draft, I'll put it in polished form. You don't have to put the title or anything. So who feels up for that? He's off the hook. I know Julie's been doing a lot of work lately. David's done a lot of work lately. Bill, would you be able to, or Kevin?
I'll do it.
And I'll take the next one. Are there two?
Well, I'll send you an email. It's either going to be April or May. I have to figure out which Sam. So let's start catch up.
Are we able to use tools like transcripts to do service? I mean, for example, Flip is attending via some technologies. Is it strictly a conference call? Could Teams, the Microsoft products that have the transcript part of the meeting?
Transcript being you can actually
It's reduced to,
listen and reduce it. Yeah, I mean,
it's actually reduced to a series of statements.
interesting. I mean, I think that sounds too thorough for minutes. I mean, I even think what I sent around here was too detailed. You can boil minutes down to about a page and a half. So I think it's not that hard just to. I think that's going to be too complex.
Sometimes there's a closed caption thing and you can just like zoom through, there's like an actual transcript. Like on Zoom you can do that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know about on what.
What are we using here as a tool? Is it strictly call-in?
Yeah. This is just a free conference call.
I wonder if the,
I don't know about that. I would love to hear about it. So if you want to introduce that, that'd be great. So somebody wouldn't have to take notes.
I'm doing it so I don't have to take notes. That's why.
Yeah, it's cool. You'd be teaching me. Is this like an AI thing?
I can't tell you.
Right. Anyways, Bill, thank you for stepping up for that, and I'll let you know which month, and I'll catch up, Sam, on yours. I apologize for that. So the long and the short of it, we got to get up to speed here, and that's been partially, or all of my fault, so.
Bill, I'll try and find it and resend it.
I'm
That
sure
would be easier, right?
Thank you, I think so. Yeah. Anyway, good, thanks, that's some business. Chairman's report, I am light tonight and don't have anything, unless you all think I owe you an answer on something. I don't think so. So I was going to flip right to John and see what, the other John, and see what you might have for us in the way of a harbor master's report.
Yeah, so one of the things I was asked to look into by Monica was placing a hazard buoy in front of that seawall, dilapidated tidal swimming pool that we've all talked about with the rebar and everything. So I went into, not only in conjunction with that, I'm also looking into anticipation of higher traffic than ever at Ziegler's in the future, 5-mile-an-hour buoys in that area. So I went out with the Darien Police a couple of weekends ago, and we surveyed the area. We talked about the situation. We talked about, in addition to the boat traffic we get now, once the beach is cleared for takeoff and public use, that's probably going to be a place for kayaking and possibly paddleboards being launched. So one of the problems I've always seen with Ziegler's Cove is people come in, they approach it fast, and many times they don't continue in. They turn to the right, head to Scott's, head to Fish. And that swoop that they make at high speed, because it's not a 5 mile an hour zone, sends a lot of waves into Ziegler's Cove. And I've been witness to it myself. I've been victim of it also over the years. Almost all the other harbors we have 5 mile an hour buoys, but we don't have them over in Ziegler's. So I approached the state. There's several different divisions, and tracking down the right person sometimes is not always easy, but I got in contact with the right person. And one of the things that I learned was, in order to be permitted for what's known as hazard buoys and speed buoys, they are tied to boating safety and boating operation. And in order to get a 5 mile an hour buoy, you have to have it stated in your ordinances or your harbor management plan that that particular area of the town's waters is a 5 mile an hour zone. Now we have all of our harbors established, but this area between the opening of Ziegler's to the opening of Scott's is essentially a no man's land. We have 5 mile an hour entrance to Scott's, 5 mile on either side of Fish Island, but that whole area going into Ziegler's, and if you look at Great Island as you approach it, you have that very, very high rock face where the house is on it. That is an area where we're probably going to see lots of more traffic as time goes on. It gets so busy in Ziegler's now people actually throw anchors over and raft up out in front of that rock face. So I had that discussion with the police, and after we had, they were like, yeah, that makes sense. So we determined GPS coordinates for a 5 mile an hour buoy at front of Ziegler's Cove. But we also feel, I also felt, and also in speaking with the person at the state, there should be another one between the GPS point that we have in front of Ziegler's, a midway point, another 5 mile an hour buoy in between where the 5 mile an hour buoy is at Scott's Cove. So that way you could have that. So after I shared with the state our link to our ordinances, she suggested that we have to designate the easternmost point of Hay Island to a peninsula that comes off of, you can picture it, it's a rock peninsula that comes off of the peninsula of Contentment Island. And it's a large rock structure. And if you draw a straight line from the easternmost point of Hay Island to that peninsula off of Contentment Island, it makes like a perfect 5 mile an hour thoroughfare area. And you'll want to stay in the 5 mile an hour zone, because to go outside of it, you're going to go through a lot of a rocky area. So that sort of, it creates almost like a natural 5 mile an hour channel, starting from Ziegler's all the way around to Scott's and all the way out to the eastern exit of Fish Island. So to do that, you have to make changes to the ordinances. I've established communication with a gentleman who will actually look at whatever changes we recommend. Now, we don't have to have all of our ordinances, not the ones we've been talking about, just the ones that pertain to boating, safety, and operation. Moorings is not safety, it's not operation, or operation of a vessel. So it's just that one piece that we have to have approved by the state. And there's a gentleman that will look it over for us and make sure that there's no issues, and that way when it goes to the proper governing body, they will approve it without issue. So there are applications that need to be filled out. There's going to have to be a site visit by the state. This is not something that's going to happen this year. They call this sort of what they deemed it as a winter project between headcount issues, vacation time and what they've already got on their plate, this is something they prefer to work at over the winter. And if I'm hearing John, the 6 to 9 month window, I think that's something that we could have those buoys in place by that period of time.
John, I got a little lost, my apologies on some of the geography. So could you go over that straight line to Contentment Island again?
All
And
right, yeah, so if you look at, I wish I don't have anything, but if you look at a chart, Hay Island, which is to the west of the entrance to Ziegler's, if you take the easternmost point on Hay Island, and you draw a straight line from that to this rock peninsula that's off the end of Contentment Island, it actually draws a line that's almost parallel to the rock face of Great Island.
okay,
So it literally creates like a channel zone where you have to maintain 5 miles an hour. So if you can picture mouth of Ziegler's 5 miles an hour, all the way in front of that rock face, all the way to the 5 mile an hour buoy now, where there is one in Scotts. And if you were to veer to even farther to the east, you would run into the 5 mile an hour buoy going into Fish Islands.
but it's not marking a channel between,
It's not,
because there's a lot of rocks in that zone.
well, it sort of keeps you in that area because of the rocks. It's not really a channel, no, but you would have to stay to the north of those rocks. So you wouldn't want to not go through the 5 mile an hour zone.
I think what you're suggesting though is this is a natural geography between 2 points independent of the hazards of the rocks. And you're looking to protect what little ways out.
Right.
I was just, the confusing part in my mind is not the connection between the eastern point of Hay Island and then the one out, farther out, and then the one in the Scott. That would seem like a natural channel, right, from going to Ziegler's to Scott. But it's then jumping over to Fish Island. There's so many rocks in that zone. With these
People cut through there all the time then.
yeah, but and I guess the buoy would add safety to that, in that it would provide a pathway for people to go and avoid those rocks.
I don't think you're trying to create a navigation pathway, are you?
No, it's not really a navigation pathway, but
Does it inadvertently
by the very
create that?
fact that the obstructions and natural obstructions are there, that's why people go through this area.
Right.
So you designate that area as a 5 mile an hour zone.
So in essence, it does sort of set up a channel.
Yeah, in essence, it's not really like a channel like Darien Harbor, but yeah, there is like a natural navigable channel there because you either have rock face of Great Island or you have underwater obstructions. It is the channel that everybody, for lack of a better expression, it is a natural channel
Yeah.
that everybody uses to navigate through that area. We would just make that area a 5 mile an hour zone. Right now, it's not designated as a 5 mile an hour zone.
I'm being a little overthinking this, but do you think that creates the illusion of more safety going into that area, going eastward towards Fish Island through that rocky area, which there's like
No,
three
no,
or
no,
four
no.
pretty significant rocks?
No, I mean, people know how to navigate that area already anyway.
Or they don't.
Or they don't. If they don't, they hit a rock.
You can't get it right.
But the point is, the safety zone becomes a 5 mile an hour zone.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it helps that way, but I'm also wondering if it draws more people into thinking, if I just go in the proximity of that, I don't need to pay attention to my chart. Whereas before, we just haven't had it marked, and it's a pretty bad zone if you don't know what you're talking about.
No, I don't think it will. I mean,
Okay.
the larger number of people that are going to be coming is going to be a result of Great Island becoming a public domain.
Right. Because we, some 3 or 4 years ago, we talked pretty much at length. Tom Bell, prior harbor master, was involved in this, about putting a hazard buoy over one of the large rocks, which you can only see really at the lowest of low tides. And it's something that Grant Tankos had said that a lot of people with 40-footers, as they gunned it and went down a little bit, they were hitting pretty significantly. But we ended up not having consensus on the commission about putting a hazard buoy there because there were so many other things. It's like if you only have to pay attention to that one, you think, maybe you won't pay attention to the others. So it's like, what do you, if you don't label them all, do you label any of them? And so that, I don't know if Tom Bell ultimately didn't do it for that reason, but we here didn't have a consensus. And I was just wondering if that might suffer from some of the same problem. Like you mark something and then everybody starts acting sort of big and stupid, thinking, oh, I just go anywhere near that and it's fine. And then you have all these rocks around. Like,
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is a thoroughfare that people use on a regular basis. All you're just telling them now is this is 5 miles an hour, not 25 miles an hour.
okay, all right. I don't think I know as much. My keel was always 5 feet 11 or something, so
Yeah.
but I just noticed there's a lot of rocks in there.
I mean, that actual navigable channel there is actually fairly deep water at low tide. It's can be onwards of 9 feet or more
Really, yeah.
that goes into Scott's and actually goes in between some very large obstructions.
Yeah.
And it's deep.
I
But then it becomes all mud and at low tide, 3 feet, 2 feet deep.
originally had one of the Unified Water Study data points inside those rocks to the east of the hazard rocks, so that we were getting more of the Fish Islands complex water. And it was hit twice by volunteers, not me, I just want to say. So we pulled that out and actually put it westward of the rocks so that no one, on a sleepy morning would hit it. But that drives a little line.
I
Paranoid.
have a little chart app on my phone, and I can show you.
I'm getting, I think, what you're saying.
I'll
Yeah.
show you.
I'm more just asking the questions.
But it kind of makes sense to me, given that we're going to have more traffic, we're going to have another public access way to the water, and the fact that people are now rafting up and throwing anchors out outside of Ziegler's Cove. A number of people think it's a good idea.
I think it's a great idea.
Great
I've gone
idea.
flying through there many times myself, with
Yeah.
people increasingly anchoring out as you're describing. And,
Yeah.
I think
And I've
it's-
even caught myself going there sometimes because I have a mooring in Scott's Cove, and I have to say to myself, I need to slow down here, not because it's the law, but it's just in consideration because I've been in Ziegler's when a good-sized boat goes by, and it, especially if the boats are resting sideways, rafted up, they just smash into each other.
I see the merit of the voyage and the safety, and we know what's up. But in our last minutes, I think we have an enforcement issue with our existing speed zone. So to the extent that we have the support of our marine police and the
Well-
support and enforcement.
Well, the police, when I went out with the police, they actually said having those buoys there would help them to be able to enforce it.
As in a dark moment on a beautiful day like today, it's not the buoyage that creates the condition of enforcement. It's the enforcement of the buoyage. So if they can't enforce what's not there, I accept that. But I also would expect that they enforce what is already established as an indicator of what they will do when more buoys are introduced. Because today that is not being implemented. So I just offer that perspective as well.
Is that it?
I think so. We haven't scheduled any more meetings as far as,
We haven't done the harbor policy, yeah.
I actually, through a mutual friend, it turns out the person I know is good friends with the harbor master of Greenwich, who actually has been trying to get a hold of me, but I guess didn't know how to get a hold of me. So I just got a hold of his phone number today, and I'm going to give him a ring. He actually has questions for me, and I imagine I'll have questions for him once we start talking. I had started a good dialogue over the past couple months with the harbor master of Norwalk, too.
That's great in terms of, reference points, and
Yeah.
so we're not not reinventing the wheel, I guess, would be the benefit of that.
Yeah.
And gauging where we're coming out with reference points.
John, are you on a path of your own independent trajectory of introducing ordinance changes or suggesting those to our selectmen? Or are you kind of just holding off?
Well, I mean, we've all been working on this as a team, and I thought initially what we needed, and I just don't know that we have it yet, is a side-by-side comparison of current ordinances and what I have proposed. Some of them actually would be add-ons to existing paragraphs in the ordinances, and some of them would be new paragraphs.
Yes, I agree that, so in Bill did suggestion to this more in policy, get your act together and start meeting, because I'm paraphrasing. So I'm going to take a role to try to pull the group together.
All right.
I've done some work on the
Appreciate that.
Stanford ordinances, comparing that to, just looking at the Stanford ordinances, and there's probably another activity, I think, in this commission to look at adjacent harbors like Greenwich and Norwalk and other like harbors. But I will assemble a group.
Okay, sounds good.
And one of the tasks is a side-by-side of ourselves, current versus proposed, your proposed, and then versus other approaches other towns have taken. There are parallels. Stanford has a policy. They have a commission like this, a mooring group. So there are parallels. There's similarities, and there's dissimilarities too.
You entered access code
Right.
1046.
I mean, I don't think I'm looking to reinvent the wheel here. I think all we're really doing is just documenting the process that has existed for a while. I've just come across issues where when I try to enforce past practices, I'm shown the loopholes. And I'm just trying to tighten those up.
And I understood. I think you've been consistent there.
Yeah.
And the manner by which we do it is probably the art of the deal. And it's interesting to see how I'll just use Stanford as an example, how they have crafted a decision around accommodating a person whose vessel changes. They have given guidelines for which the harbor master will operate under in the regulation. And I think it would give a harbor master insight and intent enough to operate with the guidelines are intended for, as opposed to absolute rigor.
Well, changing of vessels, there is a path to that. But, it's about, can the harbor accommodate it?
Yeah.
It's not an endless resource. We only have so much space in the harbor. We only have so many areas in the harbor that can handle certain types of vessels. I always draw this very, very wide comparison. You had a 13-foot whaler, now you've got a 50-foot sailboat. I can't put you in the same place, and I may not have a space for you in Darien Harbor. And that's why I've tried to, from an enforcement standpoint, which is in our bylaws, any changes to your permit, i.e. vessel, has to be approved by the harbor master first. And that helps avoid a situation where somebody goes ahead and buys a boat and then they just come to the harbor master and say, well, I got this big boat now, where are you going to put me? And I don't necessarily have a place for you.
I've seen an example of another harbor where it gives both the mooring permit user framework under which to operate that would guide his decision on a different boat, either bigger or smaller, as well as the guidance to the harbor master.
That's mine.
As how to navigate that, so that neither looks to be heavy-handed, and it would give insight to both. So there is probably an art form to that language that would guide both parties.
Yeah. I mean, the practices we have here haven't been heavy-handed. It's just a question of availability. I mean, there's people I have moved in the harbor when they have purchased a larger boat, and I was planning on moving them anyway because the boat that they were in was too large for the area that they were in already. So it worked out fine, and in most cases, it has. But I've run into situations over in Ziegler's Cove where somebody wanted to come in with a 53-footer. There's just not enough room in there with the activities that go on. So you have to be able to control what shows up. You don't, no, I shouldn't even use it that way. You don't want something like that showing up. And then you want people to be aware, if you're going to make a change, socialize it first to make sure that we have a place for you.
That's all, I'll wrap the minute, want to establish a meeting.
Really appreciate that, that's super helpful.
Then we
You did a
get
great job.
forward and do the comparisons.
Let's get everyone working on it together. Don't take on more than your share, but for you to
Sure,
appreciate
you
that,
can. I
super,
believe it.
yeah. So we're coming up on 9. I thought I'd ask if there's any more updates on other tasks. I think the only thing I wanted to in particular catch was, are we still doing July 22? Does that look good for debris cleanup?
I sent out a meeting request to everyone. I'm planning on being there. I think
Good
a
for
number
you.
of people are away, as you would expect in the summer. So whoever can make it, great, whether it's a small group or a big group, there'll be plenty enough trash to pick up, so.
So what should we bring? Like monster black trash bags? and-
I've got a bunch of those and I've got some latex gloves, or bring work gloves if you want to do that.
And Wellingtons?
Yeah, it's definitely muddy out there, so I don't know. Any other thoughts, Bill? You've done-
We have to designate where we're going, but I think we've done productive areas in the past, like the what's the island he used to live on, something Meadows,
Juniper Road.
Juniper Road,
Yeah.
but yeah, would be a great one.
Tick spray.
Behind the, Lori, behind the DJST area, I think was another area of Weed Beach that was productive. And
But
then
we had scouts clean that up recently on the
Okay.
beach.
taking our poundage away.
David, could
They're
you
just there.
repeat?
Good.
July 22nd, 10 a.m., meet.
8 a.m.
You did that based on tide chart?
Yes. So low tide is, I think, 9 a.m., so I did 8, so we have an hour on either side of low.
So we want to start at Pear Tree Point, go up the river,
Yeah, I put the meeting location as Pear Tree Point.
and then probably go in cars over to Juniper.
Yeah,
Yeah, and see how we're doing.
Well, in that stretch along Pear Tree Point Road, north of the boat club, is usually pretty productive in collecting trash too, all the way up to the sort of the Japanese house, whatever that's called.
yeah.
That's a whole area that's usually seems to just collect stuff.
Bring a sharp knife or pocket knife. I found that there are lots of ropes that get tangled into,
I mean, like mooring lines and lobster pots and stuff like that.
And and you can't pull them out, you gotta cut them.
Good idea.
2-hour affair, 8
Yeah.
to 10?
Yeah. Then you got the rest of your day.
All right, we'll hope to see everybody there. I'm definitely going. Sort of fun. It's useful, for sure.
All right, and meet at Pear Tree, you said.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
All right.
And if that's it, I'll ask, is there any other business?
I did commit to give it, we can
Yes,
postpone this
yeah,
time.
no,
this,
we've got a couple
life
minutes.
jacket program.
Go ahead, unless you need more than, I mean, next time we're gonna meet is in September. August is traditionally off, we don't have anything scheduled, so why don't we sneak this in?
You want me to sneak it in now?
Yeah, if you're not
Okay,
gonna
sure. Okay, so here's the net. So I've investigated this concept of a free loaner life jacket program. Free jacket, life jacket concept, multiple sources, CTO, both US Coast Guard Auxiliary. All of them require some more formal program enrollment, a sponsor, an administrator. It might be an interesting project for a scout-like project. Most require a dedicated location. This, for example, a Darien Boat Club. There are several in place today. Bridgeport has Boat US, CTO has Stanford, Norwalk, affiliations with US Coast Guard Stanford, Cummings Park, Cove Marine. So they're in place today. John, you've seen some of these.
Yeah.
They make provisions, also provisions for surplus life jackets to be donated. So that might be an interesting twist as well. So I'm planning. As I think about a project, there's just a couple of questions that come to my mind. Do we as a commission believe that this is a problem that we want to solve, this commission? I mean, is it on the scale of prioritization? We've heard from the police department that they want to do enforcement, but is this a problem that we need to solve, or is it nice to do? So I guess I'd like to get some kind of voice of the commission if that's a high, medium, or low gain. Are we the most appropriate entity to run a support program like this? Or is it better served by a club, Darien Boat Club, a yacht club, Darien Junior Sailing? Could be any list of things. Could be Park and Rec, could be part of the Great Island. And how would we identify a sponsor for this kind of project? So there are programs in place. It's not a major investment of effort to enroll in them, but they do want staying power as opposed to a one-time shot. So that's a 30,000-foot overview of a program that we could take advantage of if we so inclined.
Would the Power Squadron maybe be like a good sponsor of a
Could be.
project like that, if they want to be involved?
Could be. That is the case for the Stanford implementation of that.
Okay.
So extent, I'm not familiar with the Darien Power Squadron that exists.
There is.
Does- yeah.
I'm not a member of it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
So
know
that might
Frank
be a
Kent
vehicle.
wasn't very involved in it for a long period
I
of
think
time.
so too. It feels like to me that I'm on the scale of safety. I don't know we have a problem.
I heard that Sergeant Palmieri saying, though, that was a
That was a
priority.
focus for them.
A focus.
I'm not sure that behind, I didn't ask the question, says, what drove that focus?
Yeah. Well, in past years, they've had various comments about, mothers going out with young babies on stand-up paddleboards and no one's got a life preserver. We've heard anecdotal things like that. And there's no metrics of
Yeah, I know.
how many times.
I
So,
agree.
Yeah.
To make, let's establish that is a goal, if we say this is a commission goal, to create an outlet for those boaters who use the town racks for kayaks and paddleboards, to have a easy access to a life jacket. If we thought that was as a commission, we thought that was a priority, then we would need to find a sponsor and an administrator for the program to enable that. It appears
If
to
you
be
want to
more
hook into
straightforward.
one of these providers, get their funding,
Yeah.
that's,
Correct.
I mean, the funding elements of this aren't very great. Rack and life preservers.
Yeah,
And
it's not
any
high.
one of us could fund it individually for a given rack, so.
But to take advantage of their program, Boat US has a prescribed manual on how to manage this program.
Yeah.
CITO has a
So
larger
it's
manual.
very organized, that's really interesting.
And in return for those sponsorships, if you enroll in their programs, they will provide the life jackets.
So Kevin, I was confused, so when you say we need to enroll, it's with Boat US?
There's at least two programs that
Okay,
they
they have
sponsor
formal programs, okay,
Correct.
okay, I missed that one, okay, thank you.
Four well programs in place. CITO looks to have the most energy behind it. And they have local sponsorship in 4 or 5 harbors within 20 nautical miles.
Okay, I mean, I think you asked some really good questions. I appreciate you being frank about assessing it, or let's step back and assess it. I still think, like Lori, there's this great impact. The towns put kayak wrecks everywhere, and they're going to proliferate at Great Island also somewhere, I'm sure. Yeah, the way they grow, it's amazing, all the bright colors. To literally just have, one tree with life preservers next to every 2 or 3 racks, and maybe that's just then one tree at each of those 3 locations. I think that's a powerful message, whether or not it's a proven safety concern. It's a safety concern, obviously, but whether or not it's a proven problem at this stage, it's a powerful message. I think it's sort of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention at the last commission meeting that we were talking about this, and we can take a formal vote or anything, but there was just sort of a general, that seems like, that could be a good thing. I mean, you can't force it, you can't force people to put them on, so.
But it does send the message
But
when
it
you
sends
walk
the
up.
message.
Yeah.
Force them to return them.
Or we could take a different approach, not go down the path of a formal sponsorship from a CITO and just ask for funding, from either Parks and Rec funding, or Great Island funding, or Darien Boat Club funding to establish the rack and put on 25 life jackets. And end of the season, if you have, most of these are intended as a loaner program, borrow one, return one. That's the intent. And at the end of the season, if you have come back with any, you're ahead. At the end of the season, you come back none, well, you may save 25 lives. It could be as simple as that. And that might be a different approach to get the outcome we're looking for, which is awareness of safety.
You know, it's another place to put the water safety placard that we're putting on the kayak racks. It's a front and center place. And it may be at a central location. It'll draw some audience that way. It seems to me there's benefits. Maybe we all give it some thought between now and the September meeting. It's not going to get done this season, but maybe it's an overwinter project that we next spring forth with.
And the trick is always the administration. You know, well, Boy Scouts come to us with ideas for different projects, and you know, you want to support their efforts and whatever. But for instance, we have the little libraries we have at both of the beaches now. You know, one of the questions is like, okay, who's going to keep it full? Who's going to keep it full? You're going to college, like.
Year 2, year 3.
Yeah, what's happened? Or you put this up, and then who's going to maintain it? So that always becomes the issue. It sounds like a great idea, but without like longevity and ownership, you know, it'll sound great, but we have to know that we can keep it going.
That's the aspect of the sponsor that gives you the legs
Right.
over time, as opposed to a project.
Right.
So maybe that's just some food for thought. Could we ask the Darien Boat Club to assume that as part of their community gift?
I will talk to them about it. 'Cause
Great.
I know, as a matter of practice, that the dock staff at the boat club is always chasing parents with young children to wear life jackets. I can't remember if it's 12 and under or under 13, whatever the expression is.
On the dock.
On the dock. So we're forever chasing parents. You know, your little toddler needs to have a life jacket on if they're going to be on the docks. And we always have a stash of hodgepodge stuck in an empty locker someplace. But to have it out front and center, you know, they might entertain that. I'll bring it up with them.
You know, or people have visitors or guests, you know, a few weeks
Exactly.
ago, and, you know,
Exactly.
some friends reach out and they had a great niece or nephew coming to visit, and they're like, you know, you guys have small life jackets. So just
And a
people
lot of
just,
times you don't, because once
Yeah.
my kids grew up,
right,
I didn't keep them on the boat anymore, and
Exactly.
you're faced with that with guests who have small children, all of a sudden you're not armed with
right, people
proper.
are scrambling.
Yeah, people are scrambling.
Oh, Kevin, thanks very much for that.
Shall report.
So let's all think a little more about that and discuss it in the fall meetings, I think, so come September. Well, so if there's nothing else, I'll adjourn the meeting and wish you all a good rest of the summer.
Thank you.